Hypnotic Language, How to Speak and Enchant by Julian Marek, published by Audiobooks Hub. Introduction. There's a certain kind of silence that falls over a room just before someone says something truly powerful. Not loud, not flashy, just powerful. You felt it before, haven't you? A moment when someone opens their mouth and the room leans in, eyes fix, breaths pause, time slows, and the words that follow are not just heard, they are felt. That's the power of hypnotic language. But let's be clear. This book is not about hypnosis in the stage show sense. You won't find pocket watches swinging or people clucking like chickens. What you'll discover, however, is far more real and far more useful. It's about a different kind of spell, one that doesn't require magic, one that begins and ends with the words you choose. Hypnotic language is the art of speaking directly to the unconscious mind. It bypasses resistance. It plants images. It evokes emotions. And perhaps most importantly, it invites action. Whether you're a speaker, a leader, a coach, a negotiator, or simply someone who wants to be heard, learning to speak hypnotically changes how people respond to you. And not just people, it changes how the world responds to you. When I first stumbled upon the idea, I was skeptical. I thought persuasion belonged to politicians and salespeople, and that charisma was something you either had or didn't. But slowly, through trial, failure, and fascination, I began to uncover the hidden structures of language that seemed to dance just beneath the surface. And when I began to use them, genuinely, respectfully, and intentionally, things began to change. Conversations flowed. People listened more closely. And strangely enough, they started thanking me just for how I said things. This book is about those patterns. It's about discovering that you don't need to be loud to be heard or aggressive to be effective. You need to be precise. You need to speak not just to the ears, but to the imagination. Because when someone can see what you say, they believe it. When they feel your words, they follow. And when they follow, not because they were forced, but because they wanted to, you have influence. Real, lasting, elegant influence. Over the next 10 chapters, we'll walk a path together. You'll learn how to structure sentences that disarm resistance. You'll discover rhythms and phrases that naturally draw people in. You'll find out how to make your listeners see pictures, feel emotions, and move toward outcomes that once seemed impossible. This isn't about manipulation. It's about mastery. It's not about tricking people. It's about leading them through stories, questions, and carefully chosen words towards something better. You'll also learn the mistakes to avoid, the common habits that push people away or break the spell. You'll begin to notice hypnotic patterns in everyday speech, on television, in marketing, in relationships. And when you do, the world becomes a very different place. I won't promise you instant results. There's no magic phrase that works every time, but there's a set of principles, a way of using language that consistently produces more connection, more understanding, and more impact. It's a craft, not a script. And like all crafts, it deepens with practice. I'll tell you now, the secret to hypnotic language is not speaking to impress. It's speaking to express, while knowing how to do so in a way that gently bypasses filters and reaches the deeper self. That's where change happens. That's where belief begins. That's where enchantment lives. So take a breath. Let the rest of the world fade for a while, because in the pages that follow, we're going to explore the hidden structure of magical speech. And by the time you reach the final chapter, you'll hold in your mind and in your voice a power most people never even realize they have. Are you ready to learn the language that enchants? Chapter 1. You probably already know this, but most people don't really listen. They wait, they nod, they hear the words, but they're not listening. They're waiting for their turn to talk. They're filtering everything through their own assumptions, distractions, and mental chatter. And if you speak like most people do, direct, logical, structured, they'll keep on waiting. But if you speak differently, softly, curiously, with rhythm and subtlety, something strange begins to happen. Their resistance slips. Their internal voice quiets. Their eyes shift from analysis to absorption. And they begin to listen not just with their ears, but with their imagination. This is the first lesson of hypnotic language. It's not about what you say. It's about what they experience. Imagine this. You're walking into a room filled with strangers. You're about to give a short speech or presentation. You're nervous. You've memorized your talking points. You step up, and instead of saying, "Good evening, thank you for being here," you pause. You breathe. You look at them, and you say, "Before I begin, I'd like you to imagine something with me." Suddenly, something shifts. The room leans in, not because of your credentials, but because you triggered a mental movie. You gave their brain something to do. You open the door. The unconscious mind loves stories. It loves images. It loves open loops and questions. It is indifferent to facts unless those facts create a feeling or a picture. So when you speak hypnotically, you don't deliver data, you deliver suggestion. You don't instruct, you invite. You don't push, you pull. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine saying this to a friend who's stuck and unsure what to do. You should really try something different. Now compare it to this. I wonder what might happen if sometime soon you just found yourself doing something a little different without even planning it. The message is the same, but the effect is different. Why? Because in the second version, there's no direct command. There's no pressure. It's not "you should." It's "I wonder." It's soft, safe, curious, and it leaves space for the listener to imagine themselves doing it without resistance. That's what hypnotic language does. It plants seeds rather than pushes plans. Here's another principle. Use ambiguity to your advantage. Most people are taught to speak clearly and directly, and that's fine for instructions or arguments. But if your goal is to enchant, you must learn to dance. Hypnotic language often uses ambiguity because the unconscious mind thrives on it. Vague phrases like "somehow," "you may begin to feel," as you start to notice, and in your own way, allow people to fill in the blanks. And when they do, it becomes personal. They're not just listening to you, they're co-creating the experience. Consider the difference. You will feel confident. Versus, as you begin to allow those familiar feelings of confidence to return, you may notice a subtle shift. The second version is soft, permissive, and hypnotic. It's not telling someone what to feel. It's guiding them to find it within themselves. That's the magic. Now, let's talk about voice and rhythm. Hypnotic language isn't just what you say, it's how you say it. A calm, slower pace with gentle pauses creates space for the mind to wander and absorb. If you rush, the magic disappears. But if you slow just a little, if your voice flows like a gentle stream instead of a racing engine, people enter a different mental state. They soften, they open. There's also power in repetition. Not mechanical repetition, but subtle, rhythmic returns to key words and phrases. Think of how great storytellers say things like, "And just when you thought it was over, something happened." Something unexpected. The repetition isn't about logic. It's about rhythm. And rhythm entrances. At this point, you might be thinking, is this really that powerful? Try it. Try speaking to someone today using just one of these techniques. Ask them to imagine something instead of telling them what to do. Use a phrase like "you may begin to notice" instead of "look at this." Or speak just a little more slowly with a few well-placed pauses. And watch what happens. Watch their eyes, their breath, their stillness. You'll feel it, that shift. And here's another truth. The more natural it feels to you, the more powerful it becomes. People are sensitive to manipulation, but they're also hungry for connection. Hypnotic language works not because it's manipulative, but because it bypasses noise and speaks to something deeper. It feels like being seen, like being led without being forced. You don't need to be theatrical. You don't need to sound like someone else. You need to understand how people process language, how the unconscious mind listens, and how to create emotional images with your words. That's it. And once you start doing that consistently, you'll notice a strange and beautiful thing. People remember what you say, not because it was important, but because it felt meaningful. It resonated. It echoed inside them. And here's the final idea for this chapter. The best hypnotic speakers are listeners first. They notice. They respond. They mirror. Hypnotic language is not a monologue. It's a dance. You say something. They lean in. You adjust. You follow the current. Because enchantment isn't a spell cast once. It's a melody you build together. So as you finish this chapter and begin to notice your own language patterns, I invite you to play, to explore, to experiment with gentle shifts and curious tones. Speak not to instruct, but to invite, not to convince, but to connect. Because the moment you stop trying to impress and start trying to inspire, people begin to hear you differently. And once they hear you differently, everything changes. Chapter 2. Let me ask you a question, not one you need to answer out loud, but one your mind will answer anyway. Have you ever found yourself agreeing with someone, not because they convinced you with facts, but because their words just felt right? This is the invisible dance of agreement. One of the central ideas behind hypnotic language. It's not about overpowering objections. It's about aligning with the other person's experience so subtly that they find themselves nodding before they even realize it. And the way we do that begins with something called pacing and leading. Think of pacing like walking alongside someone. You match their stride, their rhythm, their mood. In language, this means you start by stating things that are obviously or subjectively true, things they can agree with easily. These can be external facts like, you're sitting here, reading these words, or internal truths like, you probably wonder how certain people can speak and immediately capture attention. These are not controversial. They're statements that create unconscious agreement. And once someone is nodding, physically or mentally, you gently lead them toward a new idea. That's the essence of pacing and leading. Match their reality first, then suggest a new one. Let's break it down with an example. You could say, you're reading this chapter, thinking about how you can use hypnotic language, and beginning to feel more curious about how this will unfold. In that sentence, the first two parts are obvious. Yes, you are reading. Yes, you're thinking about application. So the third part, beginning to feel more curious, slides in on the back of that agreement. The mind says, yes, I guess I'm feeling more curious. This technique works because the brain craves consistency. Once it starts agreeing, it wants to keep agreeing. This is a gentle, respectful way to create a mental state that's open to suggestion. Now let's add another layer. Temporal language. Time, when used hypnotically, becomes soft and fluid. Instead of saying, you will feel confident, which is rigid and may trigger resistance, you can say, sooner or later, you may begin to notice a growing sense of confidence. This changes everything. There's no demand, no specific deadline, just a gentle suggestion that something might happen at some point. And once again, the unconscious mind begins to search for evidence to support it. Words like eventually, sometime, as you continue, before too long, these create the sensation of inevitable progress without pressure. They suggest movement, and movement feels good. Let's also talk about tag questions, which are one of the subtlest ways to invite agreement. A tag question turns a statement into something softer, something more open, while still guiding the listener. For example, this technique feels simple, doesn't it? You can already picture how you'd use this, can't you? You're beginning to understand the rhythm of this, aren't you? Even if the person doesn't answer out loud, the brain does. It responds. It searches for confirmation. And in doing so, it accepts the premise more often than not. Why? Because a tag question is non-threatening. It sounds like a conversation, like a thought, like something that was already theirs. Of course, the power of these techniques only works when you're genuinely connected to the listener. If your intent is manipulative or dishonest, people will sense it. Hypnotic language only enchants when it flows from a place of understanding and empathy. That's why observing state is just as important as speaking. Start noticing the signals. Eyes dilating, breathing slowing, slight nods, longer blinks. These are often signs that someone is entering a more suggestible state. They're relaxed, open. You can deepen this by softening your tone, slowing your pace, and allowing pauses. A well-placed silence can be more hypnotic than the most beautiful sentence. And then, just when their mind is soft and receptive, you guide, gently, respectfully. Here's a beautiful structure you can start practicing immediately. It's simple and effective. Pace lead. 2 things that are true or observable, followed by a gentle suggestion. You've been reading this chapter for a few minutes now. Your mind is absorbing these patterns, and you might already be imagining how this can change the way you speak. See? It feels natural. It flows. It doesn't push, it allows. Now let's talk about something even more subtle. Embedded suggestions. These are commands or ideas placed inside longer sentences, often marked by changes in tone or emphasis. For example, some people, when they really begin to feel confident, notice how easy it is to speak in a way that others naturally follow. Did you catch that? The phrase "feel confident" is tucked inside the sentence like a whisper to the subconscious. It's not obvious, but it lands. Here's another. You might discover, even as you read these words, that a new understanding is forming quietly, naturally beneath the surface. It's like slipping a key into a lock without making a sound. The key to embedded suggestions is to use them sparingly and naturally. They shouldn't feel scripted. They should feel like something you just happened to say, almost accidentally. That's when they work best. As you practice this chapter's ideas, keep one thing in mind. Your job is not to control the listener. It's to lead their attention. That's what hypnotic language does better than anything else. It guides a spotlight of awareness. It shows someone where to look, internally or externally, so that the story they begin to tell themselves is the one you've gently shaped. And the best part? When you use these patterns with care, people don't feel manipulated. They feel understood. They feel like you're helping them remember something they already knew. That's when real influence begins. Not because they surrender their will, but because they embrace a new idea that felt like their own. So as you step into your next conversation, experiment. You're probably already beginning to phrase. Try a pace lead pattern. Try softening your pace, pausing a little longer than usual, and watching what happens. Because the moment you speak with rhythm, with care, with hypnotic intent, you're no longer just talking. You're enchanting. Chapter 3. There's something most people don't realize. Every time you open your mouth to speak, you're painting pictures in someone else's mind. The question is, are you doing it on purpose? Hypnotic language is, at its core, the art of mental imagery. When you speak, you're not just delivering sound. You're triggering scenes, emotions, memories, and internal movies. The more vivid and emotionally rich those mental pictures are, the more deeply your words sink into the listener's unconscious. That's the real secret. We don't respond to language. We respond to the images and feelings it creates. Let's try a simple experiment. Read the following sentence. Last weekend, I sat by a lake. Okay, Fine. You probably see a vague lake, maybe some trees, maybe nothing specific. Now read this. Last weekend, I sat at the edge of a quiet, silver blue lake. The air smelled like pine and earth, and a slow breeze made the water ripple like it was breathing. Feel the difference? That's the hypnotic power of sensory language. Words that speak to the senses, not the intellect. When you include sight, sounds, smells, tastes, and physical sensations, you bypass the logical mind and go straight into the body. And the body doesn't argue, it feels. This is why hypnotic speakers often use what's known as sensory-rich storytelling. They don't just say what happened, they recreate the experience. They bring the listener into the scene. And the more vivid the internal movie, the less room there is for resistance. The listener stops thinking and starts feeling. That's when your message slips beneath the surface and becomes unforgettable. Here's a sentence stripped of imagery. You'll be confident during the interview. And here's the same idea, reframed hypnotically, as you walk into that room. Hearing the quiet click of your shoes on the floor, noticing how calm your breath feels, you might realize you already stepped into your own confidence. The second version doesn't say be confident. It invites you to live it, to feel it, to rehearse it internally before it even happens. That's the power of future pacing, which we'll explore in more detail soon. For now, focus on this. If you want to enchant with language, you must create emotional experiences with your words. Let's look at another technique, metaphor. Metaphors are shortcuts to the unconscious. They're containers of meaning that allow us to say something deeply personal without ever having to explain it logically. When someone says, "I feel like I'm drowning," they don't mean water. They mean pressure, panic, overwhelm. The metaphor transmits the feeling instantly. Hypnotic language thrives on metaphor. When you describe a person's emotional journey as climbing a mountain, crossing a bridge, waking from a dream, or opening a locked door, you're doing more than being poetic. You're triggering symbolic associations, internal patterns that carry meaning far deeper than literal words ever could. Let's say someone feels stuck in their life. You could tell them, you just need to try something new. And maybe they'll agree. Maybe, or you could say, sometimes people find themselves in a room with no windows. But then one day, they notice a door that's been there all along. And when they touch the handle, something shifts, not because they know what's behind it, but because they're finally ready to walk through. That kind of story isn't just listened to, it's felt. It's hypnotic, because it invites the listener to project themselves into it. And once they do, they don't forget it. You can even combine metaphor and suggestion subtly. Like a seed that doesn't know how tall it will grow, you might be surprised by just how much strength is already inside you. What makes this powerful is that you're not commanding them to be strong. You're helping them imagine strength as something natural, inevitable, already growing. Now let's return briefly to the idea of open loops. An open loop is a story or idea that's introduced but not completed, at least not right away. It creates a sense of curiosity, anticipation, and mental engagement. It keeps the mind leaning forward. For example, I might say, there was a moment last year when I discovered something that completely changed the way I speak to people. But before I tell you that, let's explore what happens when we use emotional imagery. See what just happened? I created an open loop, a story that the mind wants to close. Until I do, the unconscious stays engaged. It's a gentle tension, and it works beautifully in both writing and speaking. It mimics the way the brain handles unresolved mysteries. It keeps them active. You can even layer loops. Start a story, interrupt it, start another, then return later. It's what great novelists and hypnotists do naturally. But don't worry, you don't need to be theatrical. You just need to be aware. When you leave something unfinished, the mind stays connected. Here's the final, and maybe most important insight for this chapter. The listener's mind does most of the work for you, if you let it. Hypnotic language isn't about stuffing someone's head with your ideas. It's about offering suggestions in such a way that their mind builds the meaning. You give them puzzle pieces, not the finished picture. And the moment they assemble on their own, they own it. It becomes theirs. That's when real change happens. So when you speak, ask yourself, am I painting pictures? Am I creating feelings? Am I leaving space for their imagination to fill in the gaps? Because if you are, then you're no longer just speaking. You're casting spells made of images and emotion, and the effect is deeper than logic, more lasting than argument. You're enchanting with every word. Chapter 4. There's a secret to making people listen. Not just hear you, but really listen. It's not volume. It's not authority. It's something quieter, more elegant. It's rhythm. People don't always notice it, but hypnotic language has a distinct flow, a cadence. It's like music. When a rhythm is right, the listener is drawn in, their defenses drop. They don't even realize it, but their breathing starts to match yours. Their thoughts begin to slow, and suddenly they're inside the experience with you. Let's step back a moment. Think about a great speaker you've heard, someone who captured your attention effortlessly. What you probably remember, even if you didn't notice at the time, is that their speech had a tempo, a pattern. They didn't rush. They didn't fill every space. They let the words breathe. This is the first lesson of hypnotic rhythm. Slow down. Slowing your pace does something magical. It creates space, not just silence, but a feeling of presence. When you slow down, your words sound more deliberate, more important. People lean in, and in that pause, their mind has time to absorb, imagine, and feel. Pauses, in fact, are one of the most hypnotic tools you have. A pause isn't just the absence of speech. It's an invitation, an opening. It says, something is coming. Pay attention. It also creates a sense of depth, like there's more happening beneath the surface. And often there is. Try saying this aloud. You can begin to notice just how powerful silence can be. See how it pulls you in? You're not just speaking. You're setting a tone. You're creating a mood. And mood matters. A lot. Hypnotic language isn't just about what you say. It's about how it feels. The emotional tone of your voice, the rhythm of your delivery, the softness or firmness of your phrasing. These create an emotional field around your words. If that field feels calm, warm, and spacious, people are more likely to relax, trust, and follow. Here's another rhythm trick. The rule of 3. People love patterns of 3. They feel complete. They land well. They're easy to follow. In hypnotic speech, you might say, you can feel lighter, calmer, more focused. Or, as you sit there, listening, breathing, absorbing these words, the first 2 elements set up an expectation. The third completes it. It feels right, final, full. You don't have to explain why. It just works. And when you're enchanting an audience, you want language that works beneath the level of explanation. Let's also talk about intonation. The way you end a sentence matters. If your voice trails upward like a question, it creates uncertainty. That can be useful when you want to sound curious or open-ended. But when you want your words to land, when you want them to carry weight, drop your voice slightly at the end. Let the sentence fall like a pebble into a pond. Say this out loud. You can let go now. Now try again, letting your voice go slightly lower on the word now. Notice the effect? It feels more certain, more final. That's hypnotic. Speaking of now, that word, along with others like already, beginning, naturally, more and more, are temporal presuppositions. They suggest something is already in progress. Something is unfolding. Something is happening. These words are rhythm enhancers. They make your sentences move. You're already beginning to notice how natural this can feel. Even if the person hadn't noticed anything before, now they are, because you've drawn attention to the process. You've synchronized their inner experience with your words. That's the essence of rhythm in hypnotic speech. Alignment. When your pace, tone, emotion, and language are aligned with the listener's inner world, something beautiful happens. They stop listening at you and start listening with you. They ride the rhythm. They stop evaluating every word and instead surrender to the flow. This is also why repetition matters. Repetition, used wisely, is one of the oldest hypnotic tools in the world. Think of ancient chants, prayers, mantras. These aren't powerful because of the literal words. They're powerful because of the repetition. They enter the mind through rhythm. They anchor attention. In speech, you can repeat phrases like, you may notice that each breath brings you deeper. Or, more and more, you begin to relax. This kind of repetition softens the mind. It bypasses resistance. It doesn't demand attention. It draws it. But here's a warning. Rhythm should never feel mechanical. It's not a script. It's a sensation. You feel your way through it. You listen as much as you speak. You notice the other person's breathing, their posture, their expression, and you adjust. Because the deepest hypnotic rhythms don't come from memorized patterns. They come from connection. When you're truly present, your rhythm matches theirs. And when that happens, when two rhythms align, the words don't even matter as much. It's the shared frequency that does the work. So here's your practice. Speak slower than you think you should. Let your words breathe. Use pauses. Use softness. Use repetition gently. And always speak with feeling. Because when your rhythm becomes theirs, when your breath becomes theirs, when your silence becomes theirs, that's when they forget they're listening. That's when they begin to feel. That's when they follow. Not because they have to, but because they want to. Chapter 5. Most people think persuasion is about giving reasons. That if you want someone to change their mind or take action, you just need to explain things clearly, logically, and confidently. But here's the truth. The conscious mind is not the decision maker. It's the gatekeeper, the critic, the justifier. The real decisions, the deep, lasting ones, are made by the unconscious mind. And hypnotic language is designed to speak directly to that part of us that feels, imagines, dreams, and remembers. So how do you do it? How do you bypass the critical mind and speak to the part of someone that actually changes? One of the most powerful tools is presupposition. A presupposition is an assumption built into your language that the listener absorbs without questioning. It sneaks past the conscious mind and plants a seed in the unconscious. For example, what will you enjoy most about becoming more confident? Notice what this sentence presupposes. It assumes you'll become more confident. You will enjoy it. There will be multiple things you'll enjoy. The conscious mind might not even notice, but the unconscious registers it all and begins to work on it. Compare that to, do you think you'll ever be confident? That question invites doubt, resistance, analysis. But hypnotic language assumes the outcome and invites the listener to imagine it as already unfolding. You can do this with almost any topic as you begin to change the way you speak. Once you've let go of that old fear, while you're discovering what works best for you, each of these phrases contains a subtle message. Change is happening naturally and inevitably, and because it's phrased so gently, the critical mind rarely fights it. This brings us to a related tool, embedded commands. An embedded command is a phrase hidden within a larger sentence that subtly instructs the unconscious mind. You don't shout it. You weave it in. For example, you might begin to feel more at ease, even now. The command is feel more at ease, but it's softened, cushioned in a way that doesn't trigger resistance. You're not ordering. You're inviting. Let's break down a few more examples. Some people notice they can relax now, even if they didn't expect to. Embedded command, relax now. I don't know how soon you'll begin to feel more curious about this. Embedded command, begin to feel more curious. These are subtle, gentle nudges. They don't force. They guide. The best embedded commands often use what's called indirect language. That means instead of telling someone what to do, you suggest it through storytelling, metaphors, or shared observations. You might say, some people find that when they imagine their ideal self, speaking with ease and clarity, something inside begins to shift. Who are some people? It doesn't matter. The listener naturally projects themselves into the sentence. It feels like a story, but it acts like a suggestion, which brings us to one of the most enchanting aspects of hypnotic language: trance. Trance isn't sleep. It's not unconsciousness. It's a focused, absorbed state, like when you're lost in a movie or a daydream or memory so vivid you forget where you are. Good hypnotic language creates trance in conversation. It draws attention inward. It slows the mind. It builds imagery, rhythm, and emotion until the listener is no longer thinking. They're experiencing. And here's the key. Once someone is in that trance-like state, they become more open to suggestion. Not because they surrender control, but because they've stepped out of critical mode. Think of it like walking into a quiet room. The noise of the outside world fades. You hear your own thoughts more clearly. You feel more present. That's what trance does. And hypnotic language is the doorway. To deepen trance, you can use vague but emotionally charged language. Instead of specifics, say things like, "You might notice a certain feeling beginning to emerge. There's something about this moment that just feels different, and as you continue to explore, you may discover exactly what you need." These kinds of phrases don't give details. They let the listener fill in the blanks. The vagueness invites personalization. The unconscious does the work. But the real secret is this: you don't need to try hard. In fact, the harder you try to sound hypnotic, the less hypnotic you become. The magic happens when you let go of performance and shift into presence. You listen, you connect, you become curious, relaxed, open. When you speak from that space, slowly, vividly, rhythmically, with emotional honesty, your words carry a different weight. They don't just inform, they transform, and people feel it. They may not know why they feel drawn in. They may not notice the techniques, but something inside them will soften, will open, will begin to shift. Because hypnotic language isn't about manipulation, it's about resonance. You're not overpowering the mind, you're slipping beneath it. You're not controlling the conversation. You're shaping the space in which change can happen. And when you learn to speak this way, doors open, hearts open, minds soften, and people follow, not because they're convinced, but because they're captivated. Chapter 6. Imagine this. You're sitting across from someone. You're speaking gently, slowly. They nod, their shoulders relax. Their breathing syncs with yours. And even though you're not giving commands, they're responding without resistance, without effort. It feels almost like dancing. This is the magic of pacing and leading. Pacing and leading is one of the most powerful principles in hypnotic communication. It's not about tricking or pushing someone. It's about building trust through alignment, and then gently guiding them to where you want them to go. Let's break it down. Pacing means meeting someone exactly where they are, emotionally, mentally, physically. You describe their current experience in a way that feels accurate and non-threatening. This creates rapport. It makes the listener feel seen, understood, and safe. For example, as you sit there reading this page, you're probably wondering where this is going. Maybe part of you is skeptical, and that's completely okay. These statements don't challenge. They don't push. They simply reflect reality. And when done well, they disarm resistance. The listener thinks, yes, that's true, and with each moment of agreement, you're establishing connection. This connection is crucial, because once you've paced someone, once they feel, even subconsciously, that you're on their wavelength, you can begin to lead. Leading is a gentle art of moving someone toward a new state, thought, or action. You start with truths pacing, and then add a subtle shift. Here's a basic formula. Pace plus, lead. Example, you're reading these words. thinking about how this applies to you, and you may already be feeling more curious about how it works. The first two phrases are undeniable. The third introduces a suggestion, but because the first two are so accurate, the unconscious mind tends to accept the third as well. It follows the rhythm of agreement. Another, you've had conversations that didn't quite land, and you've noticed how the right words can open people up, so it makes sense that learning this skill will be valuable to you. Pace, lead, seamless, gentle, effective. It's important that pacing feels natural. You're not trying to be clever. You're simply observing and stating what's true for the other person. You might pace external facts. It's getting late. You're sitting with your arms crossed. You've had a long day, or internal states. You may be wondering if this is going to work. Part of you want to believe, and part of you still doubts. Both work, but the more emotionally relevant your pacing is, the stronger the bond you create. Here's where it gets deeper. Pacing can even include resistance. Yes, even resistance is something you can pace. In fact, acknowledging resistance often reduces it. Try this. You don't have to believe any of this right now. You can just listen and notice whatever you notice. That kind of statement says, I'm not here to fight you. It relaxes a critical mind. It creates space. And in that space, the unconscious becomes more receptive. Another elegant use of this principle is future pacing. Instead of just aligning with someone's current state, you speak as if the desired outcome is already unfolding. For example, soon, you'll look back and realize how naturally these techniques became part of your daily conversations. You might not notice a shift right away, but you may find yourself using this language without even thinking about it. These statements seed future experiences. They suggest inevitability. And the mind, once it accepts a pattern, tends to act it out. Of course, all of this requires subtlety. Hypnotic pacing and leading is not a performance. It's not about dazzling someone with your words. It's about creating a shared experience, one where the listener feels gently led, not forced. Here's an analogy. Imagine you're walking with someone who's anxious. You don't drag them. You walk beside them. You talk about what they're seeing, how they're feeling. You match their pace. And slowly, as they feel safer, you start to guide the direction. Not by pushing, but by walking slightly ahead, just enough for them to follow naturally. That's what hypnotic leading feels like. Let's look at some common sentence structures that support this. As you underscore, you may begin underscore. As you listen to the tone of my voice, you may begin to feel calmer. As you think about your next conversation, you may begin to see how this applies. You might not have noticed underscore until now. You might not have noticed how often you use influence every day until now. You might not have realized how much power your words hold until now. Even if underscore, you can still underscore. Even if you're skeptical, you can still enjoy the process. Even if this is new to you, you can start exploring at your own pace. Each of these uses pacing and leading to move someone gently from where they are to where you want them to be. This skill takes practice. You learn to listen closely, not just to words, but to energy. You learn to match emotion, mirror language, and respond to subtle shifts. You learn not to push, but to guide. And most importantly, you learn to trust the rhythm of connection. Because hypnotic influence isn't about control. It's about resonance. You meet the person where they are. You walk with them for a while. And when the moment feels right, you lead them forward, softly, surely, almost invisibly. That's the art of enchantment. Chapter 7. There's a moment in every powerful conversation where time seems to slow down. It's when you're speaking and the other person is still. They're listening not just with their ears, but with their entire presence. Their eyes may drift slightly. Their breathing deepens. They're not thinking anymore. They're feeling, and in that space, something rare happens. They become open, receptive, available to change. That's the essence of hypnotic storytelling. Hypnotic language doesn't always sound hypnotic. Sometimes it sounds like a simple story, a tale, a memory, a moment. But underneath the surface, something much deeper is happening, because the human brain is wired for story. From the earliest days of language, we've understood the world through narrative. Stories bypass logic. They dissolve defenses. They make people forget to be skeptical. And when a story is constructed with hypnotic patterns, it becomes a tool of influence more powerful than any direct instruction. Let's look at how this works. First, a hypnotic story is usually personal or feels personal. You might begin with, I once knew someone who, or there was a time in my life when the moment it feels real, the listener leans in. They relate. Their unconscious mind starts looking for meaning. Second, a hypnotic story contains hidden messages. You don't say believe in yourself. You tell a story about a time you doubted yourself, made a decision anyway, and something changed. The lesson is embedded, not declared. This is known as indirect suggestion. Instead of telling someone what to think or do, you show them a pattern of thinking or doing and allow them to draw their own conclusion. For example, I had a friend, Sarah, who used to be terrified of public speaking. She'd shake just introducing herself in a group. But one day, she found herself in a meeting where no one else volunteered to speak. So, with her heart pounding, she stood up and just started talking. It wasn't perfect, but something shifted in her that day. She realized fear didn't mean stop. It just meant pay attention. And since then, speaking has felt different for her. Easier, lighter. That story isn't just about Sarah. It's an invitation. It says, if she could change, so can you. But it never has to say it aloud. The listener's unconscious makes the connection. And that's where the power is. Third, hypnotic stories often loop. This is a classic hypnotic structure where one story begins, then another is introduced before the first ends, and perhaps even a third before returning to close each loop. Why? Because the mind loves closure. When a story is open but not completed, the unconscious holds on to it, waiting. When multiple loops are layered, the attention deepens. Focus narrows. The listener drops into a light trance, eager for resolution. Milton Erickson, the father of modern hypnotherapy, used this technique brilliantly. He would begin a story about a farmer, then shift to a memory from childhood, then to a lesson about learning, and finally return to the farmer. And by the time the original story closed, the listener had absorbed 3 or 4 suggestions without resistance. You can use this too. For instance, when I was younger, I had this teacher who always seemed to know what people needed to hear. But before I get to that, it reminds me of something my uncle once told me about listening. Not just the words, but the tone and silence. And speaking of silence, I remember a moment recently with a client who said the most powerful part of our conversation was the part where I didn't say anything at all. And then you close each story one by one. Each loop adds depth. Each layer creates trance. And within each story, you hide your messages. Messages of growth, permission, and transformation. Now, what kind of story should you tell? Moments of transformation, even small ones. Struggles overcome, showing that change is possible. Curious situations that invite reflection. Analogies, metaphors that mirror the listener's challenge. Let's say someone is afraid to speak up. You might tell them, there was a cat I used to feed in my backyard. Very shy, wouldn't come near me for weeks. But I just kept showing up, sitting quietly. One day, it crept close. then a little closer, and eventually it let me pet it. Sometimes trust takes time, but it always begins with a choice to stay near, even if from a distance. What are you really saying? You don't have to rush. It's okay to be scared. And trust, like confidence, grows through presence. All that in a cat story. This is the art of metaphor as message. And here's the most beautiful part. The story doesn't have to be real. It just has to be believable and emotionally true. A fable, a parable, a dream. You can use any narrative as long as it resonates. When you combine story with pacing, embedded commands, presuppositions, and gentle rhythm, you have a hypnotic cocktail. A final tip when telling stories: slow down. Let silence do part of the talking. Let your words land. Use imagery. Use tone. Use pauses. Like this. People fall into stories the way we fall into dreams. Softly, slowly, without realizing it happening. And when they emerge, they are changed, not because you told them to change, but because they live the change inside your words. That is the enchantment of hypnotic storytelling. Chapter 8. If there's one thing that makes hypnotic language truly magnetic, it's emotional resonance. Words alone aren't enough. You can string the perfect sentence together, lace it with subtle patterns and elegant structure, but if it doesn't touch something inside the listener, it won't stick. It might be heard, but it won't be felt. And what is hypnotic language, if not the art being felt? People respond to what moves them. They act not because they are told to, but because they are stirred by something deep, something familiar, something personal. In this chapter, we explore how to weave emotional resonance into your communication, so your words don't just land, they echo. Let's start with a simple truth. Emotions drive decisions. We like to think we're rational, logical creatures, weighing pros and cons before we choose. But neuroscience tells a different story. When the emotional centers of the brain are damaged, people struggle to make even the simplest decisions, like what to eat for lunch. Why? Because it's emotion that gives value to choice. It's emotion that makes something matter. And hypnotic language honors that truth. It doesn't fight logic, but it doesn't depend on it either. Instead, it reaches deeper, past the surface, into memory, into desire, into identity. So how do you create emotional resonance in speech? First, you must feel. This may sound obvious, but many people speak from the head while trying to touch the heart. If you want your words to move others, they must come from a place of truth in you. That doesn't mean you need to cry or perform. It means you need to connect, even quietly, to the emotion behind your words. Whether it's curiosity, warmth, sadness, wonder, or joy, when you feel it, it comes through. Tone, rhythm, breath, everything adjusts, and people sense it, often without knowing why. Second, use emotionally charged language. Some words are cold, others carry heat. Consider the difference. You can improve your communication. Versus, you can finally connect with people in a way that makes them feel seen. Or, this method is effective. Versus, this might be the moment everything starts to feel easier. Feel the difference? Charged language isn't necessarily louder, it's deeper. It evokes images, sensations, memories. Words like ache, yearn, melt, glow, heavy, free, still, pulse, open. These carry emotional weight. But don't overdo it. One or two well-placed emotional cues are more powerful than a flood of dramatic words. Let them land like drops of rain, soft but unmistakable. Third, speak to core human needs. Everyone wants to feel safe, loved, valued, understood, free, capable. When your words affirm or acknowledge these needs, they hit home. You don't need to name them directly. You just need to speak through them. For example, you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Just imagine what it's like to walk into a room and know, quietly, that you belong. That's not just a sentence. It's an invitation to feel. And once someone feels something, they're far more likely to follow. Fourth, use contrast to deepen emotional effect. Humans understand emotion through contrast. We appreciate light more after darkness, calm more after chaos, love more after loneliness. So in your language, you can show a before and after, not overtly, just lightly. Most people walk through life trying not to be noticed. But what happens when you finally speak and the room leans in? Or, there was a time you hesitated, you second-guessed. But that was before you learned how powerful quiet certainty can be. By pointing to the old state, you amplify the impact of the new. Emotion lives in that shift. Fifth, speak in visuals and sensations. People feel more when they can see or sense what you say. If you say, "It was a tough time," they may nod. But if you say, "It felt like walking through a fog, each step unsure, the silence pressing against my chest," they enter the experience. Use sensory language. Visual, light, shadow, color. Auditory, silence, hum, rhythm. Kinesthetic, weight, tension, ease. Emotional, longing, relief, warmth. Bring your listener into the scene, and they'll carry the message with them. 6. Pause. Nothing dulls emotion faster than rushing past it. When you say something emotionally meaningful, pause. Let it land. Let it breathe. Sometimes, the silence after the sentence is what gives it its power. For example, and maybe part of you already knows how ready you are. That pause invites the listener to fill in the gap. It becomes not just your statement, but their realization. Finally, and most importantly, remember this. Emotional resonance isn't about manipulation. It's about alignment. When you speak hypnotically, you're not imposing emotion. You're awakening it. You're reminding someone of something they already know, but have forgotten. You're giving them permission to feel. And in that feeling, they become open. This is not about being emotional. It's about evoking emotion with elegance and respect. Because when you speak with emotion, authentically, gently, honestly, your listener doesn't just hear you, they feel you. And once someone feels you, they trust you. That's the moment when words stop being words and start becoming change. Chapter 9. The most hypnotic communicators in the world don't appear to be trying. They don't push. They don't chase. They don't even seem particularly interested in being persuasive. And yet, people lean in. People agree. People follow. What's their secret? Presence. Pure, relaxed, grounded presence. You can learn every hypnotic pattern in existence. You can master embedded commands, presuppositions, sensory-rich language, and metaphor. But if you speak from tension, neediness, or performance, your words won't land the same way. The nervous system of the listener picks up on subtle cues. Inauthenticity creates static. People don't just hear your words. They feel your state. And if your state is calm, open, and confident, their unconscious says, "Yes, safe, I can listen now." This is what we explore here. The unspoken half of hypnotic language, the energy behind the words, the silence between them, the way you be, not just what you say. Presence begins in the body. When you're anchored in your body, you sound and feel different. You're not scattered. You're not rehearsing what comes next. You're not trying to impress. You're here, breathing, feeling, noticing. That's where your power is. Try this. Before any important conversation, slow down your breathing. Let your exhale be longer than your inhale. Drop your attention into your belly. Feel your feet. Feel gravity holding you. Say nothing. Just be. From that space, when you finally speak, even a few simple words carry weight. Now consider this. Have you ever been in a room where someone walked in and said nothing, but instantly shifted the atmosphere? That's presence. And the most hypnotic part? You can cultivate it. One of the tools for doing this is what we call the hypnotic voice. This doesn't mean sounding like a stage hypnotist. It's not about being theatrical. It's about tuning your voice to a frequency that invites the nervous system to relax. A hypnotic voice is warm, with a natural tone not forced, slow but not sleepy, varied, with soft inflections and pauses, grounded, without tension in the throat or jaw, and above all, it's intentional. You don't rush your words. You let them breathe. This doesn't mean you have to speak slowly all the time. Sometimes, picking up the pace, light, playful energy, can also be hypnotic in its own way. But the default state of a hypnotic communicator is always relaxed. Because when you're relaxed, people feel safe. And when they feel safe, they let go of resistance. Let's talk about intonation and emphasis. You can take the exact same sentence and make it mean 3 different things just by changing emphasis. Try this. You can do this now. Assuring. You can do this now. Permission. You can do this now. Urgency. When you speak hypnotically, you play with emphasis deliberately. You plant ideas without pushing them. Another secret of hypnotic presence is the use of silence. Most people fear silence in conversation. They rush to fill it. But silence is where the trance grows. It's where reflection happens. When you say something meaningful, stop. Let it echo. And maybe you've already started to feel that shift. Pause. That quiet certainty. That ease that grows, not all at once, but gradually, gently. Pause again. You don't have to fill the silence. The silence is doing the work. Now, presence also means emotional regulation. If you're anxious, your words carry anxiety. If you're insecure, people hear it, even when your language is perfect. So before using hypnotic language with others, use it with yourself. Say to yourself, slowly, it's okay to take your time. There's no need to rush. Every word can land with ease. The right thing to say will come. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Notice how that feels. You're entrancing yourself first. Because in truth, all hypnosis is self-hypnosis first. And when you're calm, grounded, and intentional, your presence becomes magnetic. Another way to build presence is to practice listening hypnotically. That means not interrupting, not preparing your reply, simply being with the other person's words. When you listen like this, the other person drops into a deeper space. They feel heard, seen, and paradoxically, your presence in silence becomes more hypnotic than most people's talking. They start mirroring your calm, your rhythm, your depth. This is how hypnotic influence becomes effortless. Not because of what you said, but because of who you were being when you said it. Presence also means not needing to convince. Hypnotic language is not about control. It's about allowing. It's about guiding gently, inviting change, not forcing it. So often, we think we must make people listen. But the truth is, when you're fully present, they listen naturally. Because presence is rare. Presence is powerful. Presence creates the space where minds shift and hearts soften. The real hypnotist doesn't need tricks. They don't need flash or manipulation. They speak with quiet certainty, with gentle rhythm, with a felt sense of, I am here and you are safe to be here too. That's the real magic. And anyone can learn it, including you. Chapter 10. As we reach the final chapter of this journey, it's important to understand that hypnotic language is not just a set of techniques. It's a philosophy of communication. It's about an invitation to connect more deeply with others and with yourself. It's not about tricks or shortcuts. It's about creating real, lasting impact in every conversation you have. But before we close, let's look at how you can make hypnotic language your own, integrating the lessons from this book into your everyday life. The first step is to embrace authenticity. The core of hypnotic language is not manipulation or persuasion. It's alignment with truth. If you speak from your truth, with genuine intent and clarity, your words carry weight. People can sense when you're being real. And real language that connects with the listener's deepest needs and desires, is what ultimately has the power to transform. You might wonder, can I be too real? Is it possible to speak so authentically that it becomes overwhelming or ineffective? The answer is no. When you speak authentically, you allow others to be authentic with you. You give them permission to drop their walls and enter into the space where real change happens. There is nothing more disarming, nothing more hypnotic than the power of an honest, vulnerable voice. In fact, the most hypnotic language often comes from moments of raw truth. Think about the times when a speaker truly moved you, not because they gave a perfect presentation or used clever tricks, but because they spoke directly from their heart. They shared something deeply personal or deeply honest, and in doing so, they created a bond that transcended words. But authenticity doesn't mean you have to wear your heart on your sleeve in every conversation. It simply means you speak with intention. You speak from a place of awareness. You allow your words to reflect your emotions, your thoughts, and your beliefs, but always in a way that is kind, considerate, and mindful of the listener's experience. Next, let's talk about practice. As with any skill, the key to mastering hypnotic language is repetition. It's in the small moments of practice that you begin to build your own style. Start noticing how you speak to people in your everyday life. Are you using language that invites connection? Are you grounding yourself before conversations? Or do you rush in, overwhelmed by your own thoughts? Practice isn't just about speaking. It's about listening as well. The most hypnotic communicators are not only masters of their own words, but also their ability to hear and respond to others. They are fully present, aware, and attuned to what is happening on both the surface and beneath the surface. One simple technique to practice this is the mirroring technique. In any conversation, reflect back a phrase or feeling that the other person has shared. This shows that you're listening and that you're with them. For example, if someone says, "I've been feeling so stuck lately," you could mirror back, "Stuck. I can feel that. What's been making you feel that way?" Mirroring deepens connection and creates a sense of shared understanding. It encourages the other person to open up further, and it reinforces the hypnotic effect of your words. Another technique to embrace is the power of storytelling. The brain processes stories differently than it processes facts. Stories are emotional. They engage the imagination. They bypass the rational mind and speak directly to the subconscious. The best storytellers don't just tell tales. They make you feel the story. They bring you into the experience. They invite you to see, hear, and even be the characters in the narrative. And that's what makes storytelling one of the most hypnotic forms of language. You don't have to be a professional storyteller to use this technique. You can incorporate it into your everyday conversations. Tell a simple story to illustrate your point. Even a short anecdote can add depth and richness to your message, drawing your listener in. Here's a small example. If you want to persuade someone to take action, instead of simply giving them instructions, tell them a story about someone who faced a similar challenge and overcame it. I remember when Sarah was in your position. She felt overwhelmed, just like you do now. But then she took a simple step forward, and within a week, everything changed. It was like she unlocked a door she didn't even know was there. This kind of narrative speaks to the listener's subconscious. It shows them that the possibility of change is real, and it creates a mental image of success. As you develop your own hypnotic language, one of the most important things to remember is patience. Change takes time, and while hypnotic language can open doors, It is your consistent presence, your ability to remain grounded and patient, that will keep them open. There will be times when your language feels like it's not working. People may seem distant, unresponsive, or resistant. In those moments, remember, your words are seeds, and sometimes the seeds take time to grow. Trust the process. Trust the power of your presence. Finally, as you continue on your journey with hypnotic language, don't forget the most important element: joy. Hypnotic language should not feel like a chore. It should not feel like a performance or manipulation. It should feel like a joyful experience, a dance of connection. When you speak with joy, when you speak from a place of lightness and ease, your words carry even more weight. The most hypnotic people are those who truly enjoy the act of speaking. They enjoy connecting. They enjoy sharing their thoughts, their stories, their truths. And because they do, others enjoy listening. People are drawn to those who speak with warmth, with openness, and with delight in exchange. So as you close this book and step out into the world, remember, hypnotic language is not just a tool, it's a way of life. It's a way of inviting others to join you in a deeper, more meaningful connection. And when you speak with that intention, when you embody presence, authenticity, and joy, your words will never be forgotten. You'll become not just a master of hypnotic language, but a beacon for those who seek to be heard, to be seen, and to be understood. And that, above all, is the true magic of language.